Imagine leading a nation chosen by God, and instead of guiding it to prosperity, bringing it to the brink of ruin. This is exactly what the four worst kings of the Old Testament did. In a time when obedience to God was the key to success, these leaders made decisions that not only angered the Almighty but also jeopardized the future of Israel and Judah. And the most intriguing part? They had power, resources, and even divine support, but chose the path of disobedience. Why would someone with so much to lose make such self-destructive decisions? Get ready to uncover the shocking reasons behind these kings' choices and how these decisions shaped the history of a nation. The stories of the kings of Israel are like yellowed pages of an ancient book, full of wisdom and warnings. Most people know the names of Saul, David, and Solomon, who reigned with glory and, in some cases, regret. But what about the other kings? Those whose decisions not only influenced the fate of a nation but also echoed through eternity. Imagine leading a people chosen by God and yet, through disobedience, bringing disgrace and destruction. These are stories that deserve to be told, not only for their deeds but for the mistakes they made. Now, think about it. What drives someone with so much power and so many blessings to choose the wrong path? These kings had everything in their favor, from divine support to the respect of their tribes. Yet, their choices led them away from God and their people. As you explore these stories, you may realize that their mistakes are not so different from the ones we often make in our own lives. An unheeded piece of advice, a hasty decision, and chaos ensues. After all, how many times have we ignored good advice and forged ahead, believing we know what's best? And this is where the story starts to get complicated. On one hand, these narratives serve as examples of what not to do. On the other, they show us the importance of listening to and following the wisdom offered to us. Imagine then what happens when these kings decide to follow their own paths. Get ready, because the next part of this journey will take us to the reign of Ahab, where wrong decisions began to multiply like weeds in a field that was once fertile. Ahab, king of Israel for 22 years, is a clear example of how power in the wrong hands can corrupt an entire nation. From the beginning of his reign, he had the opportunity to follow God's commandments but was heavily influenced by his wife Jezebel, a woman who brought with her the worship of Baal. Imagine this, the leader of a nation chosen by God, turning away to idolize foreign gods. And it didn't stop there. Ahab did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord, promoting this idolatry as if it were natural, neglecting the values that should have guided his reign. But don't think these decisions went unnoticed. The prophet Elijah, moved by God, prophesied a drought that would devastate Israel as a form of punishment. And so it was. For 3 long years, the nation suffered, and the tension only increased. Elijah returned to confront Ahab, and in a dramatic episode, the prophets of Baal were defeated. However, Ahab's downfall had only just begun. He tried with all his might to ignore the signs and move forward as if nothing had happened. But the consequences of his choices followed him to his death, which occurred tragically, and as prophesied, dogs licked his blood at the same place where Naboth had been murdered. What can we learn from this? Ahab's story is a powerful reminder that the influences around us can lead us down dark paths if we are not firm in our values. He had everything: power, wealth, and the chance to rule under God's blessing, but chose poorly. And see what happened. Now, this lesson becomes even more relevant as we look at the next king, Rehoboam, whose reign began with a decision that would forever change the course of Israel. Rehoboam, son of Solomon, is one of those characters whose trajectory teaches us the power and danger of choices. When he ascended the throne, he had the responsibility of maintaining the unity and prosperity of Israel. However, early in his reign, Rehoboam made a crucial mistake by ignoring the advice of the elders who had served his father. These wise men advised the young king to treat the people with more leniency and understanding, but he, listening to the voice of the young men of his generation, preferred to impose even more oppression and burden on the Israelites. The result was disastrous. The nation, already weakened, split in two, Israel to the north and Judah to the south. This division was not only territorial but also spiritual and cultural, marking the beginning of conflicts that would continue for centuries. Rehoboam lost control of much of his kingdom, and what could have been a period of peace and stability turned into a scenario of constant tension and war. This story is a powerful reminder of how thoughtless decisions, especially those made under the influence of wrong advice, can cause irreparable fragmentation, whether in a kingdom or any other aspect of life. What can we take from this lesson? Rehoboam's story teaches us about the importance of discerning the voices we choose to listen to and the impact of decisions made without considering long-term consequences. It's easy to get carried away by ego, especially when we're surrounded by people who feed our insecurities or encourage us to take the easier path, but not always the wisest. And so, Rehoboam's mistake prepares us to understand what was to come next when idolatry and disobedience reached unimaginable levels during the reign of Manasseh. Manasseh, who reigned for an impressive 55 years, is a tragic figure in the biblical account because his long reign was marked by deep apostasy. From an early age, he chose the path of idolatry, abandoning the ways of his father, the righteous Hezekiah. Manasseh not only allowed but also encouraged the construction of idolatrous altars throughout the kingdom, including within the very temple of God. Imagine the scene. The most sacred place in Israel, profaned by pagan rituals and sacrifices that even included the king's own son. This act is one of the most disturbing examples of how far human disobedience can go. Even so, the worst was yet to come. Manasseh became deeply involved in witchcraft and other abominable practices, leading the entire nation into sin. God, in his justice, could not leave these acts unpunished. Prophets were sent to warn the king, but their words fell on deaf ears. The consequence was inevitable. Jerusalem suffered terribly because of Manasseh's actions, and he himself was captured by the Assyrians and taken into captivity in Babylon. However, even in the darkness of his captivity, Manasseh repented of his wrongs and sought divine forgiveness, something that, although touching, could not undo all the harm already caused. Manasseh's story shows us the devastating power of evil leadership, but also the possibility of redemption, even in the worst moments. He reminds us that although we may stray into dark paths, sincere repentance can still bring some relief, even though the consequences of our actions remain. And so, this narrative prepares us to understand the reign of Ahaz, a man who followed the same path of destruction, but with a very different final destiny. Ahaz, a king who ascended the throne of Judah at 20 years old, is remembered for his deep departure from God and the devastating consequences of his choices. Unlike his predecessors, who, at some point, tried to follow divine commandments, Ahaz did not hesitate to adopt pagan practices, bringing idolatry to the heart of Jerusalem. Imagine a young king, responsible for leading a chosen people, erecting altars to foreign gods within the very temple of the Lord. This choice, driven by blind ambition and a reliance on political alliances, led Judah to a state of spiritual and material decay that was almost irreversible. But Ahaz did not stop there. In his quest for power and security, he committed abominable acts, such as sacrificing his own children in pagan rituals. The despair and darkness he brought to the kingdom of Judah were reflected in the constant defeats and humiliations he suffered at the hands of his enemies. Instead of seeking God's help, Ahaz preferred to become a vassal of the king of Assyria, practically selling his nation's independence in exchange for protection. The price was high, and Judah was almost destroyed, both physically and spiritually, because of these choices. The tragedy of Ahaz lies not only in his actions but also in his inability to see the way back. Unlike Manasseh, who, even after many errors, found a moment of repentance, Ahaz remained steadfast in his disobedience. His life serves as a powerful warning about what happens when one turns their back on God and relies solely on human and political solutions. And so, we come to the end of these reflections on the worst kings of Israel, but not without first considering the legacy they left and the lessons we can learn from these stories. So, after hearing the stories of these four kings, it becomes clear that power without wisdom can lead to destruction, not only of those who wield it but of everyone around them. The lessons these kings left us are profound, and if we look closely, they can still be applied today. And you? Are you making decisions that build or destroy? Have you stopped to reflect on the influences around you and the choices you're making? History is full of examples, both good and bad, that show us the right path to follow. Now it's your turn to choose. If this reflection has touched you in some way, subscribe.